say that you are a reflection of me. He made humankind in his own image. And after making man, he takes a rib from the side of man, the one half of humankind, and he builds and sculpts a woman and places that woman beside that human being. Now, I want you to take on, if you'd be so kind, and if you can use your sacred imagination, I want you to think of what you might feel if you opened your eyes and looked into the face of Almighty God, closed them again, and when you opened them again, there was this beautiful vision of loveliness, the other half of yourself, bone of your bone, flesh of your flesh, who is now presented to you as the one who will be your helpmeet, the one who will be your partner, your full partner. And for those of you who don't know, a woman was not a junior partner in the business of humanity. A woman was a full partner when it came to the creation of humankind. I want you to think about what you would have thought if you opened your eyes on that sixth day and there you stood before God in a garden filled with delightful things, in a world that was teeming with every gift and favor that you could imagine. And God says, I am giving this all to you and trusting you with it. Wouldn't you want to know why? Wouldn't you want to know who God was? Wouldn't you want to know what was expected of you? Wouldn't you want to know what is required to keep or maintain this? That's why it was so important for God to make a seventh day in which he did nothing else except spend it with the two children that he had just created, who had so many different questions on their mind. One man and one woman. And that's the way it ought to be, one man and one woman. And so far, you've been listening to just one man. We now have joining us, ladies and gentlemen, one woman, because we can't do this thing all by ourselves. Please make welcome the eighth wonder of the modern world, all the way from the hills of Montgomery County and Berks County, Pennsylvania, fresh from the making of rutabagas, Miss Linda Anderson. Linda, how you feeling? And
Indeed.
happy Thanksgiving
Indeed.
to
I
you.
fought my way to you tonight, Pastor Nick. I fought my way to
It is
you.
always
I'm
good to see
good.
you.
I'm good. How are you this evening?
I am really good. I am still thinking warmly and with great curiosity about the great meal that you prepared this past Thanksgiving. For
I'm
those of
still
you who don't
full.
know, it's still full, huh? She made a wonderful dish of rutabagas, and most
I
people don't even know
did.
what a rutabaga is. Most people think a rutabaga is a car with four doors and a small engine from a foreign country.
Yeah.
So tell
Yeah.
everybody what a rutabaga is, and then
It's a
how you
root.
made them.
It's a root.
Oh,
And I have to say that I so enjoyed Thanksgiving. Not just for the food, but for the fellowship, the family, the fun. And yes, the food was truly involved. And I did make rutabagas. It's a recipe passed down to me from my mother. And a lot of people aren't fond of rutabagas. It's an acquired taste, but I season them with brown sugar, nutmeg, butter, something called McKay's chicken style seasoning, which I think is just powdered gold, and some salt and pepper. And I boil them until they're just tender, and I eat them with greens. You can eat them by themselves, but I cut them into cubes, and it's a delightful addition to a Thanksgiving meal. I keep
what?
promising I'm going to make some for you, Pastor Nick.
Well, you got to. I mean, especially now that you
I
put
will
it out there, you may
indeed.
have to open a restaurant and bring everybody else in. But
Listen,
what do they taste like potatoes? I know you said they're root
they
vegetables, so
taste like turnips. They taste like turnips,
okay.
but they are heartier and they're firmer. And you have to really acquire the taste.
Mm.
You either like them or you don't. But I shared some with several people and they all enjoyed them. My daughter refuses to eat them. She won't eat that veggie. But her mother-in-law enjoyed them thoroughly along with me. So I think that they're good. You'll have to judge for yourself.
Look, I'm looking forward to it, and we shall close the gap so that I can see exactly what all of the glory of
Indeed.
rutabagas are about. But
Indeed.
one of the things we were talking about in the episode that we released on Friday was the importance of human connections. And when you think of Thanksgiving, of course, you think about human connections, you think about family.
Mhm.
When you go back to the earliest time of your recollection, when as an infant and a child, what thoughts of your connections with parents and siblings might you be able to recall?
I recall something that you also touched on during Friday night's broadcast of the rest of your story when you talked about trust.
Mm,
I trusted my mother. I trusted my father. They gave us no reason not to trust them. I always felt safe in my father's company. I always felt safe when my father was driving. We could go to sleep in the back seat of the car and never worry that we would be unsafe. Just like with cooking, we trusted what my mother cooked. We
mm,
trusted her to provide for us and to care for us. We trusted her to teach us. And I think that those are some of the essentials of the relationship with God that we are hoping to deepen and expound upon is that trust, the trust factor, the comfortability that we have in the presence of God. Some of us feel fearful of our connection with God because we fear that it's going to require something of us that we may not be able to give, or some behavior that we won't be able to perform. But if we trust God, if we get into that trust relationship that you were talking about, I think that we will find that there's no reason for fear. There's no need to
mm,
fear. And so, yes, those are some of the things that I remember. I remember my mother combing our hair, and
mm.
I was a little afraid when she had that pressing comb, taking care of what she called the kitchen, which is in the back of our
The
head.
kitchen. I
And
was just thinking of the kitchen. Yeah.
you really had to trust when you get that pressing comb, that searing hot comb, close to the little short hairs on the back of your neck, and your mother tells you to be still. You better be still, or you will be branded. But those were experiences that, for me, allowed the takeaway of trust.
Hmm.
Trust.
One of the things, and I've had the privilege of working with and learning from some of the brightest minds when it comes to what's called brain plasticity, which is how the brain develops. And trust is something uh, that we don't come with. We have to learn trust. And
Mhm.
the earliest connections in the life of an infant, for example, when a baby is uncomfortable, now the baby can't articulate. Babies don't call you up at 2 o'clock in the morning and say, "Excuse me, mother, I am feeling a slight dampness in the diaper area. I'm wondering if you might be willing to rise up out of the comfort of your bed and come and swaddle me with a new A baby can't do that, but what a baby
All they can do is
does
cry.
is cry. And even though a baby does not understand and cannot articulate what it's doing, the brain begins to form connections that say, when you are in need or when you are uncomfortable, someone will come and will bring comfort to you. And if
Yes.
that happens in an infant's life, the brain wires itself in a way that says you can trust that you will be okay in difficult times. But if nobody comes for that baby, if the baby is left to
Mm.
cry and left in their diaper and in their waist, and or if somebody comes and roughly treats the baby, they say that within the first 6 weeks, a baby can tell by the way it's being touched and handled whether or not they're being caringly handled.
Cared for.
And and the brain, get this one, Linda. The brain is making connections, putting together a map saying if you are in danger you'll get help, or if you're in danger nobody's coming. And that is what allows a child to begin to develop trust, as the brain makes those connections saying you'll be okay, you'll be
Those
safe,
neural
somebody cares
pathways.
about you. Those neural There you go, those neural pathways.
Mhm.
Do you realize how many? I was shocked at first that I'd heard it was over 700 per second. They are now upgrading it, saying that an infant's brain is making neural connections at the speed of about 1 million per second. And so
Mercy.
everything that we do to interact with that infant is teaching it what to perceive about the world and about its place in the world. And that's how trust gets built.
And we are fearfully and wonderfully made. I'm always puzzled as to the disbelief in the power of a God that could create a human infant that can process over 100 million um, connections per
Connections.
second.
Yeah.
That's
Mm.
amazing. You know what I've learned, and I'm still learning. I think I'll be learning until the day that I die. I'm
Mm.
learning that we sometimes mistake faith and trust. And I think that we need both in our relationship with God. We need both faith and trust. I believe that I believe that trust is something that is established through experience. You tell me that you're going to pick me up at a certain time, and up until now, you've always picked me up at that time. You learn to trust your doctor because he's given you good sound medical advice.
Hmm.
So you've developed trust for a person who has been true to their word. But so faith, though, is based on a lack of evidence, so
Mm.
that you trust the water faucet because every day until now, you've gone and you've turned on the water and water has come out. That's trust. I trust that there will be water because every day until now, there's been water when I turn on the faucet. Faith is going to that faucet every day and turning it on, even though up until now, no water has come out. But you
Oh,
continue to go and turn on the faucet because by faith you believe that water will come. I think that our relationship with God has to be based on both the trust that we've
okay.
developed because He has cared for us, and the faith that we have in Him that He will provide certain things, even though up until now we may not have experienced those things. And I think that those two factors together enhance our relationship with God on a level that one or the other would not. So
Hmm.
I think that as
Faith and
Christians,
trust.
faith and trust are essential. I may have trust for an individual, but I don't necessarily have faith in them. Yes, I trust them, but I don't have faith in them because the Bible says really don't put your faith in anybody per se. But I will trust you. But faith is something entirely different. And I think with
Hmm.
God, we're able to have both of those and experience both of those for the deepening of our relationship.
Linda said, I trust you, but I'm still going to cut the cards.
I'm going to
Well, let
make
me
sure
ask you
I
a
got
question.
my own way.
One of the things we were talking about on Friday and that we bring into this conversation now is the issue of intimacy. How important is faith and trust when it comes to building an intimate relationship? And by intimate, I'm not just speaking about the psychosexual involvement between two consenting adults. I'm talking about a relationship that goes beyond the casual and the surface, a relationship that,
Closeness.
yeah, yeah, that kind of close. How important is faith and trust for an intimate relationship?
I think they're both essential because in a relationship that doesn't have to involve anything sexual, say a close friendship or the relationship you have with family, you need faith and trust because this is who you have been joined together with. And
Hmm.
if you want your relationship with a person to deepen, you have to be willing to take a risk. Last week, you had a guest who you talked with, the pastor who you spoke with about all of the different components of a relationship and trust.
Hmm.
And risk is one of them. Being willing to take
Yeah.
a risk. You can only be willing to take a risk if you have trust and you have faith that the risk is going to produce something that is not harmful, if that makes sense. In
Okay.
intimacy, you are taking a chance. You're taking a chance and you are uncertain of how it might turn out, but you're willing to trust the person and you're willing to have faith in them because you want your relationship to go to that deeper, intimate level. And I'm not talking about a sexual relationship. I'm talking
Hmm.
about the closeness of a friendship, the intimacy between mother and daughter, between father and son, between pastor and congregant, between counselor and patient, Those are all relationships that require a certain level of intimacy if you are going to achieve the most in that relationship. And so I think both faith and trust are essential. I think they're both
Let me
essential.
and this is getting interesting to me. So, can you have faith and trust in a person and build an intimate relationship without physical connection?
I believe sometimes you have to, depending on the type of relationship, depending on the type of
Okay.
relationship. Um, because, say, for example, and in my work, I have to have an intimate relationship with the young ladies because they have to trust me with their private lives, their personal lives,
Hmm.
their issues, their challenges in life. And if we're ever going to achieve that type of relationship, working relationship, dean and student relationship, where they can be honest with me, there is no physical connection, but there is an intimacy because they know that they can come to me and tell me, Dean, this is what this person did to me. This is how I've been harmed. And we don't like to talk about it in our religious lives or our spiritual lives, but there's a lot of abuse that people experience in life.
Oh yeah,
And I think that it
absolutely.
requires intimacy for people to be able to open up and unload the burden of that experience. Intimacy is
Hmm.
needed for so many reasons, not just husband and wife relationships or male and female relationships. It's essential for so many types of relationships because you want something that's more than superficial. I tell my friends all the time, I have some very, very close friends, and I call them deep end friends. That means we're not in the shallow water together. We're in the deep end together. We're in that deep water where you fear you may drown if someone does not save you, does not reach their hand out to you and pull you out. And you become a deep end friend through being intimate in your life, through experience, hardship, brokenness, the death of family members, broken marriages, different experiences that deepen that connection and deepen that intimacy so that you can further develop the trust in the faith.
Hmm. So let's now parlay that. Let's take it over to the spiritual realm because just as it takes faith and trust and experiences that to build intimacy with one another as human beings, how do we translate that into our spiritual connection if we're trying to develop intimacy with God?
I believe that we have to be willing to be transparent with God, to be naked before God. I remember I worked at WOCG some years ago at Oakwood College then. It's now WJOU. And there was a duo, married couple that would come on and they would do a program weekly. It was Trevor
Hmm.
and Edith Frazier. And
Oh,
in
okay.
there, yeah, and they did a wonderful broadcast on relationships. And at one point, I remember one of the broadcasts where they were talking about intimacy. And they were talking about how you have to be willing to be naked with your partner, not in the physical sense. That helps too sometimes. But you have to be willing to be naked. That kind of helps sometimes, if I'm being honest. But you have to be willing to be naked with your partner in terms of your feelings, your fears, your doubts, your issues. You have to be naked so that they see you at your worst and learn to love you there. And I think that in our
Hmm.
relationship with God, we have to be honest with God and let God, He has seen you at your worst, and yet He sent His Son. We
Hmm.
have to be willing to let God know our hurts, our pains. We can't just try to pretend with God. We have to be honest enough with God to say, God, I almost slipped when I saw the wicked and how they prospered. I almost
Hmm.
fell apart. We have to be willing to say to God, God, I was very hurt and broken when you let my mother die. You allowed that because you knew that ultimately it was for her good, for our good, but it hurt me. We have to be willing to be honest with God and naked before God and transparent with God when we say, God, right now, I don't even want to pray.
Hmm.
Because God saw Adam and Eve naked, and their shame made them cover themselves, not his shame.
Hmm. That's very well put. It's and I remember one person saying that after man and woman went astray, that God cursed the ground, that God cursed the serpent, he cursed everything, but he didn't curse them. Everybody else received condemnation, but the people, God found a way to preserve them. But now,
Mm.
when we talk about intimacy, for example, in a relationship, if I'm in an intimate relationship with someone and I find out that they have strayed from that relationship, it breaks that intimacy and it's really kind of hard to rebuild. Does the same thing happen in our relationship with God? I mean, because God doesn't stray, so if anybody goes off, it's going to be us.
It's us.
Uh, does that intimacy break? I mean, do we lose it?
I believe that we can
Does
damage
God
our.
divorce us?
He doesn't, and I thank God that he doesn't divorce us because um, he probably would have divorced me numerous times by now. I think that yes, our relationship with God can sometimes feel fractured, but it's fractured on our end. Because his word says, I will never leave you nor forsake you. I won't do it. So if there's any leaving or forsaking that's being done, it's on the part of man, not God. But sometimes
Mm.
we are, in our humanness, look for someone to blame. And we often blame God for things. I've heard so many people say, well, God let us be slaves and God, and we blame God when the truth of the matter is, all God did was let us have the power to choose. He let our he let our human will be executed.
Mm.
So the result of a lot of what's happened to us in our lives is not because God did it to us. It's because God gave us the power to choose, and in our choosing, evil happened.
Mm.
So,
And
yes, I think
so,
sometimes our relationship with God can feel fractured and it can be broken, but in the same manner that many a spouse has forgiven that wayward husband or wife, and it takes time to
thank
rebuild.
you for adding "or wife" in there, because normally they just say that
Yes.
wayward husband. Thank you
No,
for giving equal
no,
time to.
it's an equal opportunity. Adultery is an equal opportunity occupation.
Yeah, it is. It is. It
It
is.
is.
It is. Indeed,
And
indeed, it is.
I've often shared with people in some of my women's conferences, et cetera, that, we are so busy sometimes trying to find the perfect person, not realizing that we're not perfect and that we all have sinned. The Bible says all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. It's just that some of us commit different sins, and some
Hmm.
of our sins are more obvious. I remember once a pastor saying to me that if every sin um, made you cause you to be pregnant, we'd all be walking around looking like we were 9 months pregnant. If every
Hmm.
sin gave you a protruding belly, we'd all look like we were 9 months pregnant. So sometimes we are so busy looking for someone to be perfect. And that doesn't mean that being hurt and requiring someone to win our hearts back is not okay. But it does mean that if you do want to save a marriage or a relationship and you feel that you want, you and the person, both male and female, want for that relationship to be worked out and salvaged, I don't think there's anything wrong with trying. It may work, it may not, but I don't think there's anything wrong
Hmm.
with trying. And I know that God tries time after time after time with us to try to rebuild our relationship once we've broken it. And so I think that if we are really truly interested in making relationships work, we owe it to ourselves and the person to try it if we both agree that that's something that we want to do.
I'm going to see if I can build a bridge to intimacy and Sabbath in just a moment, but First I want to use your sanctified intellect. Uh, how, let's say a relationship is broken or fractured, or even just trying to build it fresh. What are the essential elements to building an intimate relationship with somebody? If you had to say, these are Linda Anderson's 5 things that you must do to build an intimate relationship with somebody. And I mean, put some verbs in your sentences and tell me some things that ought to be done in order to build an intimate relationship.
We must be honest with each other.
You must
And I
be
think
honest,
that's
okay?
I think that's way up at the top of the list. We must be honest with each other. We must be willing to compromise and sacrifice. We must
Okay,
be willing
compromise.
to compromise and sacrifice. We must be willing to admit our wrongs. We must be
Okay.
willing to acknowledge when we've done wrong. We must be interested in the well being of the other person as much
Hmm.
as, if not more than ourselves. We must be
Mm-hmm.
willing to be interested in the well being of the other person. And we must be willing to work, put the work in, do the
Okay. Oh
work,
yeah.
make
A
the effort.
relationship requires work. Let me share some of the items from my list, and that is one: you must remove distractions. In order to build an intimate relationship, you've got to get rid of distractions. You can't build an intimate relationship with somebody with if her
Focus.
friends are always around talking about when we going to the mall, when we going to do this, and you
Mm,
gotta and or if he is always trying to watch the game and doesn't want to talk to you, you got to remove distractions. Two,
mm-hmm,
you must spend time and space together. If at
mm-hmm,
all possible. Real intimacy requires the spending of time, the build, and the sharing of space. I always tell couples when I'm doing premarital interaction and consultation with them that especially if you don't know each other and if you haven't lived in the same village and you haven't shared the same fabric of life, you've got to be
mm.
about the business of building experiences that will give you a history together because sometimes history will hold you together when your future looks dim. So you got to
Oh
be able
my.
to spend time and space with each other. You've got to be able to share values, perspectives, and outlook with one another. I mean, these are 3 things that I think are really important. So it's got remove distractions, share time, share space, share values, and other priorities, and
I
then
agree wholeheartedly.
last but not least, you must do these things systematically. You can't just say, "Well, I didn't we go out and have dinner, back in 1963?" It has to. We're creatures of time,
Campus
so we have
one.
to cycle back to things, and
Mm-hmm,
and and I say those things because that's what real Sabbath allows for: the removing of
mm.
distractions, spending of time, spending of space, sharing of values and priorities and principles, and
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 all of those lead to
the,
intimacy.
all of those things create a level of intimacy. Fellas, if you're listening, you want to know why you can't seem to get her to respond to you anymore. Ask yourself, how regularly do you spend time with her and share your values and your vision together like that? And there's
And
the
focus
amazing
on her.
thing now. And folk, have you ever gone past a restaurant and watched 5, 6 people? They're all eating lunch together and they're all doing like this.
They're on their
Okay.
phones.
Yeah, they
Been there, done
I've
that.
seen people. Oh, I've seen people sitting together, and I'm watching them on their phone. I said, "What are you doing?"
And
They
they're
said, "We're
both on
talking
their
to each other,"
phones,
and they're all on there. Yeah, I mean, it's just
sitting
you've
side
got
by
to remove
side
distractions.
on their phones.
Yeah,
I think
yeah.
it's important to acknowledge the fact that all of those things that you just said are encapsulated in the do the work part, because all of those things
Mm-hmm.
require effort. Every one of them requires
They
effort.
do.
And you have to know what your partner needs. And you won't know if you don't focus on them and spend time with them and remove the distractions, as you said. And it's funny because I have, I was so tickled once. I was talking to my daughter, and she was on her phone when she was young. And my brother and I were so tickled by the fact that while we were talking to her, she had one of those little slide up phones at the time. And my brother and I were so tickled by the fact that while we were talking to her, she was on her phone. We got our phone and we text messaged her what we were saying. We were right there with it. We said, let's just text message this joker. And we text messaged her. And when she saw our message come up, she herself she was tickled by it. And, one of the problems that I think a lot of us face in our human existence and the relationships of our human existence and our relationship with God is that we are half-heartedly interacting with him. The kind of
Hmm.
interaction that you're doing something else and you're listening to the sermon, or you're doing
Hmm.
something else and then you say, oh, let me pray, and while you're praying you're thinking about a million things that you have to do.
Yeah.
We live this life of distractions that I think prevents us, and I think it's a tool of Satan, because he knows that if he can capture our attention, that we stand less of a chance of developing that closer relationship with God than we would if we could focus on him. He did it to Jesus. When he tempted him, those
Hmm.
were distractions.
Yeah. Well, the human brain is endlessly curious, so it is easy for us to be drawn away. Which is why I remember when I first became aware of this idea of Sabbath, and that is, I remember them saying you can't watch TV and you can't do this and you can't do that, and it was all about the can'ts. But I began to think that that was the basis of it, what you can't do. But I began to realize the can't do part was simply removing the distractions so that you can focus on what you need to do. But we live in a world now where distractions find us. In the days of Christ, especially if you lived in Jerusalem, when the sun set on Friday, all activity ceased. You had to go out of your way to find a distraction.
Mm,
But nowadays, distractions flood us. I mean, from the radio in the morning, the television, our phone is going off, all of the things, the sounds all around us in our communities. It's hard for us to focus our minds nowadays.
very true.
Yeah,
Very true.
meditation is a lost art. It's a lost art. You know.
I find it interesting that as you look at the Ten Commandments, and you were discussing this in your Friday night broadcast, how um, everything that involves the Sabbath is done to show us that we can trust God, that He cares for us, that He loves us. And as we look at all of the Ten Commandments, all of the commandments are preventive medicine. God is
Hmm.
telling you what not to do because He's trying to prevent you
Yeah.
from falling
Yeah.
into problems, trouble. But the Sabbath is the one where He shows you that He cares for you. The others show you that He wants to protect you, but the Sabbath shows you how much He cares for you, because in that commandment He says, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days shalt thou labor and do all thy work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord thy God. In it thou shalt not do any work. So essentially He's saying, rest. I
Hmm.
care so much about you. One of the best ways that anybody has ever shown me how much they care for me is when people have come to my home and said, "Sit down. I'll do that for you." That is amazing to me. When my daughter says,
You
"Mom,
have any of those
you have
people's
not
phone
sat down
numbers?
yet." I have people who have
I
come and
need to
said,
call
"Please
a
sit
couple of them.
down." Yeah, please sit down. Handle it. I remember when my mother, the day that my mother died, a tragic day indeed. And my mother died suddenly in my home.
Oh
My
my.
friends, suddenly in my home, she laid on my sofa and literally died there. The day before she was going to go home to Connecticut, she had come to visit me in Baton Rouge, and I was in the midst of being separated from my husband.
Oh,
And I
good
was,
night.
it, it was the perfect storm. And my mother had come to see about me, and she had spent the week with me, and she was going to make dinner for all of my friends because she was a cook by trade. And so she announced to me that you ain't got nothing in this house, so go to the store. And I went upstairs to get dressed. And the long and short of it is, while I was upstairs getting dressed, my mother was on the phone downstairs talking to my friends at the local Christian school, telling them what time to come for dinner. And she hung up the phone. I heard her hang up the phone. And as soon as she hung up the phone, I was upstairs and I heard a strange sound coming from downstairs. Well, that was the wind coming out of her body, her last breath.
Mm.
And I came down the stairs and my mother had died on my sofa. And the rest was a whirlwind of activities. That morning, we had our morning devotion, studied the morning watch, and that afternoon at 2 o'clock, I was picking out her casket. But in between there, my friends all came and they made me sit down while they cleaned my house.
Wow. I mean, that
My friends
is,
made me rest. They made me rest. And there were a lot
wow.
of things that were done for me that were beautiful. People sent flowers and cards. All of those things were lovely. Some of them recommended you need to go talk to a counselor, all of that. But some of them came and said, sit down. You sit
Hmm.
down, you rest, and we'll take care of these things.
You
That's
know, I mean,
caring.
first, it is absolute care. I mean, when you can turn caring into currency, when you can, it's
Mm,
one thing when somebody says, I care about you, but when people can do something where that caring is translated into an action that you can consume, that is a gift beyond words. But just listening to your story, my heart goes out to you because you never. I mean, the loss of your mother is a closing of a cosmic door that
mercy, yes.
is yeah. I can remember. I didn't go through what you went through, but I am wondering what might have happened if you did not have friends who could have come to offer that gift of relief and release for you. I mean, that was truly a gift. I mean, when you think about the God who says, "Come unto me, all you who labor and are heavy laden, and
I will
I
give.
will give you." Yeah, I mean,
And then
the,
it goes
the,
on to say,
the
and you
per-
shall find rest for what?
for your souls.
Your souls.
You
That's
know,
deeper than your
I mean,
body.
deeper than yeah, I mean, deeper than your body, deeper than just your mind, but at that inner place where spirit, flesh, and emotions and everything meets,
And
you'll
sometimes your
find
soul
rest
needs
for your
rest.
souls.
Your
It's
soul needs rest.
mine needs rest a whole lot of the times,
Mine
but
too. Mine too.
I mean, and you're going through at that time, you were going through the sundering of a relationship that
Hmm.
you thought would last forever, and
Oh,
then to
indeed.
lose your mother. That Linda, that is the kind of testimony that flesh and blood didn't pull you through that. That was something that only God could do for you.
And the caring God whom we serve, I clearly see why. At the time, I was, of course, devastated, but through the years, I have come to fully understand why these things have happened. And we don't always get that benefit because, the song says, we'll understand it better by and by. There are some things we won't understand. But sometimes God gives us that blessed opportunity to understand some things right now. And I do understand
Mhm.
that God allowed me to go through those things because He had a plan for me. And in order for me to be able to perform the tasks he had in my future, I had to have that training. I had to have that experience. And I remember the first time I had a student at Oakwood University whose mother had died while she was there at her freshman year. And they contacted me, and she was out traveling with the Aeolians. And they told me
Mm.
when she comes back, we're going to need you to minister to her. And I spoke with the family and they said, we need you to bring her to us. And I understood firsthand what that young lady was about to
Mhm.
go through. I had another experience with another young lady whose mother, her freshman year, passed away. And I went to her room and had to tell her. And she laid across my lap on her bed and screamed and sobbed. And I knew I was familiar with those sobs and those screams. And I realized that this is what she needed to do to be able to release the pain that had just been heaped upon her. So, through my life and through my experiences that came after that, my subsequent experiences, I've come to understand that God allowed that for me because he knew he could trust me with that. And
Yeah.
sometimes we want to be spared, but God said, "Consider my servant Job," because he knew he could trust Job with the loss and the pain and the leprosy, and Job would not curse him. He would not keel over and die. He would still trust him. He said, "Though he slay me, yet will I trust him." And that's the kind of relationship God wants with us. And sometimes we've got to go through some painful experiences in order for what? The intimacy to develop. And that's one of the ways that even in relationships, intimacy is further developed. You go through some stuff together.
Oh, look, let me tell you, you know, when you go through things together, it builds a bridge and a connection between you and other people, or you and God, that cannot easily be broken by circumstances and words. I mean, you know, experience and history can build ties between people that are lifelong, and that's why you have to go through some things together. For those of you who are listening,
Hmm.
you may have experiences that you've gone through that you might need some help carrying that load. I want to give you a number right now that if you wish for us to pray for you, and perhaps you might want to reach out to Linda and say, you know, I've gone through something similar. But the number is 1-855 God Cares. 1-855 God Cares. That's 1-855 463 2273. 1-855 463 2273. You know, you made mention of the fact about the release, the letting go, when a loved one passes, like when your mother passed. A few years back, my mother passed, not in as
So
dramatic a
sorry.
fashion as your loss, and
But
she was
it's
95 when she died. You know, we weren't cheated. And I mean, we enjoyed her for all the time we had. But the other thing the
but you
Sabbath
still
teaches
miss
is
her.
how
I
to
don't
let
think
go of
age
things.
even
I miss
I
her
don't
every
think that
day.
age factors in. Yeah.
Every I still
Yeah.
can't bring myself to remove my mother's name from my phone. You know, the last
Hmm.
message that she left to me is still on my phone. I can't let go. Of course, I miss her, but you know, with the passing of time, the tears become, you know, smiles of remembrance. But what Sabbath teaches us is the fine art of letting go of things. You know, like you come to the end of the week and you say, you know what, I've got to let go of everything now, and allow God to fill me up with other things. And even when it hurts, sometimes we just have to learn how to let go. And I
Yes.
imagine it took an extraordinary amount of grace to get you at that point in your life when you were already being torn by other releases to let find the grace to let go.
It did. And I thank God for how he handles each of us and our lives, and um how he chooses to teach each of us. He teaches us where we are. He helps us where we are. And so if God is trying to teach me to trust him, the way he teaches me to trust him and the way he teaches you to trust him m- are not likely to be the same, because we're
Hmm.
all unique, we're all different. And so I've come to appreciate how God deals with me. I don't think that I could have handled what he did with Job, but he trusted Job. And the funny thing is, we talk about how we trust God, and I know that I can trust God. We know that we can trust God. I have no doubt I can trust God. But what something wonderful happens when you start to understand that you're in a situation where God is trusting you.
Hmm.
And I
Yeah.
think that it's with pain and loss and heartbreak and disappointment that God shows that he trusts us, because he trusts us not to give up. He trusts us not to throw in the towel. He trusts us not to turn our backs on him. And I think that's a wonderful thing to know, that you're in a situation when you're going through a painful experience, that you're in something that God is allowing because he trusts that you will make it through.
God's relationship with us starts with trust. I mean, even from the beginning of creation, you have Adam and Eve. They didn't have any experience. If I'm looking for somebody to run the world for me, I'd look for somebody with a resume longer than one day. you know, but he
Yeah,
throws them the
right,
key to the
right.
world and says, "I'm trusting you with all of this."
Hmm.
And as a symbol of
Yeah.
that trust, just don't bother the one tree that I said
And then
that
they
you don't need
showed,
to bother.
they showed
And
him
of
that they
course,
wasn't
yeah,
trustworthy.
yeah, they showed them who they were, but still, God comes back, weaves them new garments, and
Hmm.
and gives them trust again. I mean,
He
how
did,
hard
because
is
he
it?
put them out of the garden, not out of the world.
Yeah, and half of that putting them out of the garden was to save them. There's an
Right.
interesting passage in Genesis 3 where God says, "Let's put them out of the garden, lest they take and eat of the fruit of the tree of life and they live forever." God was saying, "I can't allow them to live with the misery that they're
Mm-mm.
about to experience that they can't even know yet." I mean, but
Uh,
but when you think about what it takes to trust somebody when they have really messed up in
mhm.
your life. I mean, have you ever had an experience where you had to figure out, can I find the raw kindling to rebuild the flames of trust with somebody who has messed up the trust that I gave them the first time?
Oh yes, oh yes, and I've done that. I've trusted after being disappointed. Now I have to give this caveat that there are times when trust runs out, when you
True,
trust a person over and
true.
over and over, and they just keep showing you who they are. I think it was Maya Angelou who said, "When a
Yeah.
person shows you who they are, believe them."
Believe them.
Um,
Yeah.
leave them. So there may come a time when you have to, for your own protection, decide, you know what? I'm gonna love you from a distance. I'm gonna trust you from afar because I kind of like not being in prison, and I kind of like not having a deadly disease. So sometimes you do have to make that decision to say, you know what, I'm gonna take care of myself now. But up until that happens, I think that you can sometimes decide to trust someone again. And sometimes they don't disappoint. Sometimes the one
Mhm.
time disappointing you is all they need. I've seen relationships where people have been hurt, and when they saw how much they hurt the other person, it was life changing. And they, as far as the human eye could see, never did that again. And I think that's possible. But there are times when you do have to cut bait and say, you know what?
Yeah.
For my own salvation and for yours, because I know that the marriage vows say till death do us part, but I don't think it should mean homicide.
I hope
I could
not.
be wrong,
No,
but I
I
don't
hope
think that's
not.
what it meant.
It is, you know, being trustworthy, making the best of God's second attempts to trust us. I'm reminded of that passage of scripture in Second Corinthians chapter 7 and verse 11, where he says, "For observe this very thing, that you sorrowed in a godly manner, what diligence it produced in you, what clearing of
Mm.
yourselves, what indignation, what fear, what vehement desire, what zeal, what vindications, in all things you proved yourself to be clear in this matter." I mean, re-earning or giving yourself an opportunity to become trustworthy again by the God for the God of the universe is something that takes effort. I think we practice that on a regular basis. Every time we get to the end of our week and we push out the distractions and give ourselves over to giving full time and attention to the presence of God and one another, it allows us to rebuild that sense of intimacy and trust that may have
Mhm.
gotten lost or broken.
I
I
agree.
think.
I agree. I think that that's why the examination of the Sabbath in this way is essential to our development of a relationship, a lasting, enduring, ever deepening relationship with God. It's essential because it started with Him saying, "I care so much about you that I know that if I don't free you from the distractions of life, you
Hmm.
will allow them to consume you. If I don't
True.
give you a pause button that you can push
Hmm.
at this point in the week, you will kill yourself trying to do more and more and more. And even still, with that opportunity to rest, we still overdo it at times. But God is telling us, I care so much about you. I need you to stop for a moment. Sit
You
down.
know,
We'll take care of this.
like your friends did
Like
during
my
that
sit
awfully
down.
tragic moment. It is a gift when somebody comes along and says, let me take this from you, and why don't you take a moment to catch your breath and take your ease and recover yourself. There's nothing like being able to find refreshment and recovery
Mhm.
in your life. And so I cherish that thought, and I cherish intimacy, space with God. One of the things I've noticed, have you ever gone to one of those kind of churches where there's so much noise, so much activity, so much energy being expended that you don't really get a chance to reflect or think or just absorb the
Yes,
presence
I've
of
been there.
God. It's all up and down, back and forth, making noise
In the
and all
river
like
on the
that.
bank, I call it. Stand up, sit down, stand up, sit in the river on the bank. Um, and I do think that God does want us to just have a moment. Have you ever taken a
Yeah.
long distance drive with someone and you like days or hours
Hmm.
and hours,
Hmm.
18-hour drives? It is such a relief when somebody else in the car says, I'll take over.
It sure
You get
is.
it as long as they can drive.
Well, that does help,
As long as they
because
drive with
if
some
if
sense.
if you're afraid of if you're afraid of their driving skills, you don't rest when you're trying to
No,
rest.
you're putting on the brakes in the passenger seat and grabbing for the
Indeed.
wheel. But when they can drive, when you can trust them at the wheel and you can
Hmm.
hand over the task to them and you just rest, it is a beautiful thing. And that is what God offers. He says, let me
Ladies and
drive
gentlemen,
this thing for you.
an hour just flies by when you're having fun. And we've been spending this time together. She's Linda Anderson, the maven of rutabagas, and I am Pastor Nick Taliaferro. And this is the rest of your story Talk Back Tuesday. You can visit with us at messagemagazine.com. That's messagemagazine.com. And if you'd like to leave a message, if there's something that you want us to pray about, and I will assure you of this, that if we get your message, I will make sure that we spend the time. I will take the time to pray about these things. The number is 1-855 God Cares, 1-855 God Cares. That's 1-855-463-2273. We're out of time, Linda, but I don't know. Would you like to pray for the people after that moving
I would love
testimony
to
you
pray
gave?
briefly.
Would appreciate it, good sister. Have at it.
Thank you. As we bow our heads, kind Father, just thank you. Thank you for allowing us to know you in an intimate way and for knowing how much you care. And I pray, dear God, that for each of us who may be going through something, that we will know beyond the shadow of a doubt that we can trust you and have faith in you and rest in you. Be with each person listening, each person who may be going through the trials of life and feeling like giving up. Let them know, God, that you are there for them and that it is you who are saying to them, sit down, rest a moment. I've got this. And we thank you in advance. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen, indeed. Linda's always a pleasure. I'll be looking forward to those rutabagas,
My
and may,
pleasure.
may may every memory of your mother be blessed of heaven, and may every remembrance bring you closer to the hope and faith that will lead you to that brighter day when that which
Thank you, my
appears to
friend.
have been taken will be returned forever to you. And to all of our friends, we thank you for joining us on this Talk Back Tuesday. It's time for us to say farewell to you. We look forward to seeing you on Friday when we share with you once again the rest of your story. Have a very, very pleasant evening.
God bless. Bye.
And more.